welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about John Key's property predictions. Well, I'll tell you what, Andrew, there was a webinar that I saw by Stonewood Key, which is a developer, a couple of weeks ago, and I watched it, and I thought it was quite a good chit-chat, actually. John Key, former Prime Minister and, most importantly, Chairman of ANZ Bank, giving his predictions for what's going to happen to interest rates and the property market. But while it was a good chit-chat, it wasn't as structured as I like things to be. So what have we done? We have clipped out the top 7 clips with John Key's property predictions. So if you don't feel like listening to the whole hour and a quarter, though you probably should listen to it. It's quite a good chit-chat. But these are the main points that you need to be aware of. So, Andrew, what is clip number 1?
So clip number 1 actually got a bit of media attention, and here it is right here.
To really get the property market to really crack, you'd have to have interest rates going through the roof from here, and you'd have to have labour markets going through the floor. And we do all of that stress testing of our balance sheet at ANZ. And even then, we see property prices down, obviously from where they are, and pretty significantly down. But that's Armageddon.
That's Armageddon.
That's Armageddon.
So the two things that are going to have to cause that would be higher unemployment and much higher interest rates than we're seeing today.
And that's the important thing, that it's a big rise from today's already high interest rates, rather than saying, well, today's interest rates are high, so maybe that's going to cause the market to totally collapse. No, we're talking about massive increases from today. And it's worth asking the question, why are we listening to Sir John Key? Well, it's actually not because he was the former Prime Minister. There are lots of former Prime Ministers whose property predictions we wouldn't actually take seriously. It's because he is the chairman of ANZ Bank, and ANZ Bank has mortgages with 2/5 of New Zealanders, or rather I should say 2/5 of New Zealanders have mortgages with ANZ Bank. And so the information that he gets as the chairman and the conversations that he's having both with the board, the CEO and the management, that matters. As well as that, he has had a very successful career in finance. And so when he's talking about economics and what's going to happen to interest rates, hey, it's actually worth listening to him. But it's not necessarily because he was the Prime Minister. So whether you think or not, hey, he was a great politician, doesn't matter, mate. It's because he's chairman of ANZ. Now, clip number 2 is about if high unemployment and interest rates could kill the property market, are we going to see that higher unemployment? Let's take a look at the clip.
We look at recessions, we look at property at ANZ, there's only 2 things we worry about. Do people have a job, and how much are they paying for the money? And you see at the moment, unemployment's down at 3%. Well, when I came in Prime Minister in 2008, the Treasury, the first thing they told me was they expected unemployment to peak at over 10%.
It was double digits, right?
Yeah, over 3 times what it is today, 4 times probably what it is today. Now, I don't think you see anything like that in New Zealand, going forward. I think maybe it rises a bit. Maybe it goes to 3.5% or 3.7%. Maybe a few people get laid off. But I don't think it's anything like that.
Now, the interesting thing here is not just that he initially said to get the market to crack, we'd really need to see massive unemployment. And he's saying we're potentially not going to see that. The other major point was, what did he say? He said unemployment would go to perhaps 3.5%. What's the Reserve Bank saying it's going to go to?
Can't remember.
5.7%.
I was about to say 5%.
So the fact that, JK here is saying, well, we might be 2.2 percentage points under what the Reserve Bank's saying, I think that's a really important point if we're thinking about the Reserve Bank currently forecasts that we're going to go through a recession in 2023, and they're predicting quite a large spike in unemployment. Look, John Key's not the only person saying that that amount of unemployment is unlikely to eventuate. Tony Alexander is as well. But I found that point was one that should have been picked up in the media and wasn't, because it's the difference in unemployment that these people are expecting. Let's come across to number 3 then.
Okay, so we're not going to see high unemployment rates. What about the interest rates?
Well, interest rates are going up, and they're definitely going to go up. So our economist thinks that they go 75 basis points in February, and then another 25 and another 25. And that takes the OCR from 4.25 to 5.75. And that would take a fixed mortgage up to
close to 8%,
and floating, believe it or not, to 10%.
Maybe double digits. Yeah.
But this is what I think. I think that the Reserve Bank might be underestimating, the impact with all of these people who are currently paying 2.95 or 3.25 come off and have to renegotiate. I guess the point is I would not be surprised if the official cash rate tops out at less than what our economist thinks and maybe a little less than what the Reserve Bank's saying. And if you buy into that proposition, then there is a chance, isn't there, that we're sort of 1% from the top.
Cool. So now we're saying that maybe interest rates are getting near their peak of where they're going to land. And yes, probably some more increases to the official cash rate. But as we've spoken about on the show, that doesn't necessarily pass down directly to fixed interest rates.
Oh, you are guaranteed to see more increases in the OCR. Anybody who thinks otherwise is reading the wrong news. We're going to come to clip number 4. So to get the property market to really crack, we'd need to see much higher unemployment and much higher interest rates. And John Key's saying we're potentially not going to see those. That raises the question of why. Why won't the Reserve Bank need to increase interest rates as much as they're currently saying in order to curb inflation? Let's see what he's got to say.
One of the things that's really interesting at ANZ, of our customers who have borrowed for a home loan, up until about a few weeks ago, 57% of them still had a mortgage that either had a 2 in front of it or a 3 in front of it. So they're going to have to roll off very soon, right?
Soon,
the next 6 months. And when they roll off, they're going to roll off in something with a 6 in front of it, right? Maybe even higher. So you can't tell me that isn't going to have a dramatic impact on people's capacity to go out and buy everything from pizzas to a new frock.
So what he's saying here is that the Reserve Bank have already done a lot of work, but actually not everybody is feeling the impacts of that. Yep, we're all scared off by the higher interest rates that we can see in the bank windows, but actually, are we all having to pay that? Well, almost 3 in 5 borrowers, at least at ANZ, are still on very low interest rates. So they might be thinking, well, very soon I'm going to have to pay more, but in the very near future, next couple of months, they are going to be paying those higher interest rates. That's going to mean they are going to have to constrain their spending, which means we'll start to get inflation more under control. So perhaps the Reserve Bank won't have to ramp up those interest rates quite as much because that effect will start to flow through to borrowers.
So the market isn't going to necessarily come crashing down. What is going to happen with house prices?
Let's play the next clip.
But I just think that overall, do I think house prices will one day be higher than they are today? I would bluntly bet my life on it.
Well, Andrew, would you take the same bet? Would you bet your life that house prices over the long term are going to increase?
I'd do one better. I bet yours.
Not as valuable to you. So if we think that house price is going to continue to increase over the long term, how does that make sense when aren't our house prices here in New Zealand so much higher than the rest of the world? How is that even possible that they're going to go up further? Let's hear what he's got to say.
And that's what you've seen internationally. So when people talk about the international property markets, they gloss over the fact that if you live in Hong Kong, you're in an apartment. If you're in Brisbane or Melbourne, you're in an apartment. I mean, the big developers, and we bank a lot of them at ANZ, in Australia,
they're all apartment guys.
They're massive apartment guys.
Like Harry Triggoff and stuff.
Yeah.
And so the key thing here is that when you're looking at international comparisons of what's the average house price in Los Angeles, or what's the average house price in Berlin, and how does that compare to Auckland? Oh my gosh, Auckland is very expensive, even when we adjust for currency differences. That in Germany you're paying in euros, and here in New Zealand you're paying in New Zealand dollars, and euros are of course worth more. But even after you account for that, New Zealand houses are very expensive. But what we're not considering is, well, what is the makeup? What are you getting for that? Because the average house or the average dwelling in Berlin is going to be perhaps a small 2-bedroom apartment. I'm making it up. I don't know the exact data, but it would be something like that. Compare that to the average house in New Zealand, which might be 3 bedrooms on 600 metres squared worth of land. They are different products. We're comparing different things. That might be the average, but you're not saying, well, what's a 2-bedroom apartment in Auckland compared to a 2-bedroom apartment in Berlin? It'd actually be more expensive in Auckland because German house price is quite low, but compare it to, say, a 2-bedroom apartment in London or something along those lines. We need to use better points of comparison if we're really going to say, well, are New Zealand house prices that much more expensive when we're looking at the same product?
And then that takes us to our final clip, which is how are people going to be able to keep up with the affordability if house prices continue to rise?
You will see, I think, structural changes in the market, and I think those structural changes will lead to quite a bit of the sort of product that you have, because I think people will trade land for lifestyle and land for location. So what they'll end up saying is, look, yeah, of course I want to own a quarter acre section in Parnell or Remuera or whatever St Heliers, and of course I want to, have a big area for the kids to run around and a dog and everything else. But you know what? That costs so much money. That is not practical for your first, maybe second, third, or ever home. A hell of a lot of young people will start in something like you're building, for instance, out in Westgate, where it's it's in that sort of 800 to 950 sort of market. It's 3 bedrooms. It's got a garage. It's great. It's a great place to live. It'll be a fantastic little property. The probability of people making money, you've got to say, you'd think over time would be very high. The upkeep's low.
And just to be clear, when he's talking about what properties, quote unquote, you're building, he's talking to his son, Max Key there, who is a developer developing at Stonewood Quay. So, Andrew, what was the most interesting point from you looking at those 7 clips?
I think the two things is, firstly, the point about comparing different products in different locations. I'd never actually considered that before. That's a really, really good point. A 2-bedroom townhouse in Melbourne, for example, where I've just come back from, is significantly more expensive than Auckland. And we just use the average data, which gives you misleading information. Second thing is that the interest rate changes that the Reserve Bank have made will take a while to hit home, and you're not going to feel those to next year. So what I do think will happen is people's spending habits will change leading up to that, knowing that they're going on to a higher interest rate. But the New Zealand economy is a slow ship to turn, and when they do have the intended effect of slowing down inflation, then the Reserve Bank will bring down those interest rates again.
Yeah, the most interesting thing for me is the structural change in behaviour in terms of what he thinks young people are going to buy. And I do think that he's right, that when I grew up in a tiny wee town called Hawera in South Taranaki with 10,000 people, and nobody lived in a townhouse. Everybody lived on a quarter acre section, big fat lot of land with a decent house. And when you think about today in the more metropolitan centres where most people live, Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, people are becoming more accepting of living in townhouses, and the reason is because you can't necessarily get a mortgage in order to purchase the same sort of 3-bedroom property with a lot of land. It's just not as achievable anymore. And so you see that change. And when you look overseas, like when you're talking about a 2-bed townhouse in Melbourne, you already see how that change has already occurred in some of those larger cities, because it's just not affordable to own a big plot of land with that house. And so I think you will see this change in what people are willing to live in and what they'll accept.
And I think people don't want it necessarily either. You look at some of the townhouses that are built near parks, people would far rather have the council maintain the kids' playground rather than them have to worry about mowing their backyard.
Right, we're going to wrap it up there, but if you want to watch the entire webinar for that, just go on Facebook and search up Stonewood Quay. You'll be able to find the whole 75-minute-ish presentation. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Property Academy podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Cedric Knight. I'm going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of your property market. Until next time.